G'day, welcome to the third video of part 2 in Programming Fundamentals. In this one, we're going to be looking at the design phase, so that third section of our waterfall and agile approach. And so this is the stage where the business analyst will, after they've sat down with the clients, they've had their chat, they've figured out why they want some software, they've then sat down and figured out what does the software need to do to solve their problems, and then they're actually going to start building it. Okay, they're going to plan it, they're going to design the interface, they're going to design what goes in and out, all that kind of stuff. Now, this is going to be a very chunky lesson. So I'm going to break this down into probably 2, maybe 3 videos. We'll see how we go. But essentially, if you have a look at it, we're in the third phase, as I said before. All the things that we need to consider aren't just what the program looks like and some of the code that's going to happen. It's things like what goes in, what comes out, well, who are the users, what data do we have, where are we going to store it, what is the code, what is the interface, what's security, and all the other stuff around that, okay? So we're first of all going to learn in this video the IPO diagram or table, depending on what you want to call it, and the storyboard to try and keep things as simple as possible. In the future videos, we're going to dive into all the other ones. So for right now, let's have a look at the IPO diagram, sometimes called the IPO table for good reasons. But IPO stands for input, process, output. And what it is, this is big picture stuff. This is looking at what does the user put into the program, what happens to what they put into the program, and then finally what comes out of our program. Okay, so again, input is what the user puts in or anything that the software generally gets. Output is essentially what's the result of everything happening. And then finally, what is the code actually going to do? In this little example that we've got here, I've got input. If you can try and guess what this is as I go through these things. For the input, we've got a card number, we've got a PIN, we've got an account, we've got an amount, and we've got a receipt, yes or no, sort of things. And if you haven't guessed already, this is an ATM. Okay, so with an ATM, you put your card in, which reads your number, you type in your PIN, you select your account, and then how much money do you want to pull out of that account? And finally, do you want to print a receipt? Now, there might be more inputs these days, but we're just keeping it simple. Now, the ATM would then talk to the bank and say, is this a valid card number and PIN? Okay, and then it would check how much money you've got in your account before it actually, gives you the money. There's probably other processes like subtracting the amount that you've just done, recording it somewhere, all that kind of stuff. But I've tried to keep it simple today. And for output, we've got your card back. You've hopefully got some money. You get a receipt. And if there's any errors like you got the wrong PIN, insufficient funds, can't print the receipt because I've run out of paper. So this is an IPO, okay? And before we leave it alone and forget it ever exists, this is probably the first diagram you'll ever make to represent software that you create. Because you want to have a look at, all right, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, and what are the processes? And quite often, I actually do this in quite a weird way when I draw an IPO diagram. I actually start with the output column because I feel like that's the easiest thing to think of. If you think about the Fun with Flowers shop, the output is the user gets a bouquet, there's a personalized message, there's an order made, and there's probably an invoice or something like that, or a message or an email sent. So there's all the outputs of our application. What goes into those? Well, there's the order, there's the user's details, there is the personalized message, and then there's like the payment details. And then you think, okay, how do I connect those two together? How do I connect what they put in with what I've just produced? So things like checking if the address exists, checking if the payment goes through, checking your stock levels, checking that the message will actually fit on a card. Then you're going to produce the card. Maybe it just prints it off automatically. It's not handwritten, anything like that. Okay, it sends a message to maybe the worker and maybe the customer as well to say the order is being processed or is ready, those kind of things. Okay, that's the order in which I do it. I do it almost backwards. I do the output, the input, and then the process at the end. But as a bit of a test to you, I want you to create an IPO diagram for creating or making a sponge cake. Okay? Now you can obviously do this in pen and paper if you really, really want to, but I've got my lovely stylus here and I'm going to quickly show you how I would do it in something like Microsoft Whiteboard. So let's jump into that. Let's create a new whiteboard. And this is free, by the way. I love free stuff, so let's stick with the frees. Let's start with a blank canvas. So to create the IPO table or chart or diagram or whatever you want to call it, we're just going to write the words input, process, and then output. And then draw up your lines. Wow, that's a shocking line. Let's see if I can do it. Nope. Okay, that's a shocking line, but who cares? So we've got our input, our process, and our output. And as I said, I would attack this output first because that always tends to be the easiest one. What is the output for making the sponge cake? Well, it's obviously you get the sponge cake, don't you? Then I do the inputs second. In other words, what are the ingredients that go into a sponge cake? And then finally, what is the steps to making that sponge cake? Okay, so this is the idea of an IPO. So start here with the outputs, make sure you've got all those. You could even put mess, because you've got to clean up the mess. Input, what are all the ingredients that go into it? And 3, the steps to create the sponge cake. Now, before you jump into this, try and keep it simple because you could blow this right out. You could write every single word from a recipe. You could say 1.5 cups of sugar and 6 eggs separated into whites and yolks, all that kind of stuff. But keep it simple. Inputs could be things like sugar, eggs, flour, and everything else that you need. And then for the process, again, you could go absolutely bonkers. You could write down, turn your oven on at 180 degrees Celsius. Okay, if it's fan force, then make sure it's 160 degrees, but just like turn on oven. Okay, just keep it simple. Step 2, get ingredients. Step 3, separate eggs. Like just really simple, on the point, straightforward process. So I'm going to leave that with you guys. I'm not even going to go through the full response. I just want you to practice creating an IPO chart. So I'll pause and we'll jump back to the slideshow in a sec. Okay, hopefully you have a great idea of how to make an amazing sponge cake. Personally, I think sponge cakes are the best kind of cake. But time to move on to our next type of diagram, a storyboard. Now, if you've ever done storyboards for movies or filmmaking or anything like that, you're thinking of the wrong kind of storyboard. They're similar, but not quite. A storyboard shows off what your interface will look like and how each of the screens in your program is connected together. So in this example here, you can see that we have got the home screen tab because this is highlighted, telling us we're on the home screen. And on the home screen, we've got info. Now, obviously there would be writing here, but they've just put lines to indicate there will be writing that appears. We've got some more down here, an image of the canteen, there's an exit and a help button. Absolutely lovely, okay? If the user was to click the prices button, we follow the line and that takes us to the prices screen. We've got the price list. Here are all the items in our prices for the canteen. And if you want to go home, you click the home button, which takes you back to here. Otherwise, we've got the specials where you've simply got a description of the specials. Okay, and now as you can see, those buttons allow us to go around the interface as well. So with this storyboard here, we have a rough idea of what the canteen interface is going to look like, and it gives us a rough idea of how to get from one screen to the next and back for that matter as well. Now, one really key part is about creating a user-friendly and a consistent interface, okay? What are some of the rules that come with it? Well, I'm going to go through a lot of rules in a second, and they're not even like, I've tried to summarize some of the lists that are out there because there's some crazy lists. But for now, what are some of the major rules? First thing is consistency, a consistent placement of objects. You can see the buttons are consistent on every screen, the headings are consistent on every screen, and the information or like the key info is in a rough, similar spot on every single screen. The second rule of thumb is making sure things are grouped together. Again, all the navigation is grouped together. The headings technically are grouped, and the information or the key information is all grouped in one section of the screen. Next one is clean fonts. These may not be the final fonts that they use on this school canteen, but it's a simple font. It's an easy to read font. It is a sans serif font. In other words, sans meaning not, serif meaning the flicks on the end of letters. Great example for you is Times New Roman. It has little flicks on it. Don't use Times New Roman, please. It needs to die. It needs to be buried and sent off. Sans serif fonts are where it's at, okay? Things like Calibri, Arial, Sigu, those kind of ones, or even Microsoft's new one. which escapes me at the moment. Starts with an A, but anyway, we'll come to that later on. So make sure you've got those consistents, those good fonts, those good colors as well. Good colors are incredibly important. So making sure you've got all these things. Another big one is icons where possible. Please make sure you use pictures. If it's a save button, put a save icon on it. If it's a copy button, put a copy icon on it. If it's an undo button, you get my point. Okay, it is better to do that because A, it's easier to find and it's universally understood. And B, you don't have to translate it. Okay, if you release your application in Chinese or Japanese or Spanish, you don't have to translate an icon, which is beautiful. That's why it's universal. Next one that I haven't mentioned is white space between controls. Let your controls breathe. Don't jam them all together to try and fit everything into a tiny little interface. Space it out, and if there's not enough room, think what you can get rid of or move it to a separate screen. Okay, so screen designs. Let's skip forward. I love this little quote here. A user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. Damn right. This is just a quick little example I found on good old Google Images from Maze. As you can see, a good interface should be consistent. You've got your nav bar across the top, you've got your headers, you've got your main content, and you've got other navigation down the bottom. If that stuff moves around, it is just plain painful. People can't use your application. It's not intuitive, and they'll probably drop it. They probably won't. Even if it's an important application, if it's not consistent, they're just going to forget you. So, testing yourself. We're going to make our own school canteen mobile app. And on this interface, I want you to include things like, what is the name of the food? So I'm going to rewind a little bit. I don't want you to make a whole canteen app. I want you to just sketch one screen of a mobile app. So it has to fit a mobile phone. In this screen, you should have the name of the food item. So imagine I've wanted a meat pie and I've clicked on a meat pie. Somewhere on the screen, it needs to say meat pie. The second thing is it should have a picture of the meat pie. It should have some basic info about that food. It should have the price and a button that I can click to purchase that food. So I'm going to pause and I'll show you an example that I've put together in the past to maybe give you some inspiration. But pause the video, have a go yourself, see what you can come up with. All right, and we're back. So with my lovely little interface here, as you can see, at the very tippity top, I've got the name of the food. I've got a hamburger button, which indicates navigation. And that would live there for the whole app. I've got a little shopping cart icon, which would have the number of food items that they're currently buying. We have a picture, like as you can see, that amazing looking meat pie just there. Maybe you can scroll between pictures, that kind of stuff. We have some health details, some just details, about it. You can click on health to have a look at like the nutritional information about our pie. Then you've got a big fat buy now button floating over the top of everything with the price. I've tried to group some things together. Maybe you could put the price up here. Don't know. And I was having a think about a floating button, the kind of thing that Google loves to do. Not so sold on that. But there you go. There's my lovely interface for my school canteen meat pie. So hopefully you understand a bit more about IPO tables and your screen designs and storyboards for that matter. But for the next video, we're going to jump into our level 0 and our data flow diagrams. So I'll see you then.